Welcome to episode 1 of A Libation in Honor of My Ancestors. This is a part of the new podcast, There Is No Formula. When we speak of ancestors and libation, we're talking about something that's sacred. Ancestral libation is an African form of prayer that invites us to use our voices to honor and call on our loving, wise, and well ancestors. Those who came before us, those who sacrificed and laid the foundation for us to walk Mother Earth, for us to wear our crowns. This episode pays tribute to Marcia Duvall's ancestors, some of whom lived in a predominantly African-American town called Stewarttown, which later became Laytonsville and what is now Gaithersburg, Maryland, and Montgomery County. During this episode, I speak to Marcia about her Duvall, Fraser, and Prather ancestors and how they shaped her life. Marcia is also going to share the life lessons and wisdom that she learned from some of her key ancestors, including her grandmother, her aunts, her uncles, and extended and chosen family. You know, the folks that we call play aunts, uncles, brothers, and sisters, but they are our family. Well, hello, Marcia. How are you?
Today, I am excited. I am curious about what is going to come out of my mouth. I'm good. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. And I just have to tell everybody that it is a privilege and a pleasure and a very powerful affirmation of who we are as women of African Indigenous descent for us to share our stories. And so with that said, everybody, we're going to get this party started with some juicy questions that I know you are truly going to enjoy. Dr. Maya Angelou, one of our most powerful ancestors and one of my sheroes, said, "I honor all ancestors who tried to stay alive and be somebody so that we could be here, and try to accept that we've been loved, each of us, maybe by somebody 3 generations ago who never even thought what name you would carry, that they paid for you already." Dr. Angelou's words are a call to action for us to honor, remember, and receive the love and the wisdom of our ancestors on a regular basis. That means 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So let's start this episode by calling on your ancestors, Marcia. Let's have a virtual libation. And I invite you to share the names of the ancestors who helped shape your life right now.
Well, there's no other way to start than to start with the womb that I exited, Sarah Clarissa Duvall, later to become Dry. My uncles, her 2 brothers, Leonard and Boise Duvall. My grandmother, whom I did not have the opportunity to know in person, Gladys, and my great-grandmother, interestingly enough, I did have a few moments with. Ella, and my play aunts and uncles played such a big role in my development. My Aunt Bert and Uncle Charlie, great aunt, actually, great aunt, great uncle, Bert and Charlie Harris, and 2 of my mom's dearest friends, Mildred and Amora, interesting name, right? Carol, and my goodness, Virgie Frazier, and Rebecca Diggs, and Aunt B, and my goodness, I told myself that I wasn't gonna struggle with my memory, that I was just gonna call the names that came. And so I guess those are they.
Ashe. And I would add all those unknown names that are in your family line.
Mm,
Ashe.
I should.
Let's take a big breath for the ancestors. And then let it out with a soft smile of gratitude. So, when we were planning this sacred adventure, this podcast series, you told me about the power and the presence of your Duvall family and your life and the trips that you would take to visit them in Stewarttown. This is that historic town, everybody, in Montgomery County, Maryland, that we talked about, that was originally settled after the Civil War by a small group of powerful Africans who were previously enslaved and freed men, women, and people. Marcia, I want to know, why is Stewarttown important to you?
Well, it's like planting flowers, I guess. It's like getting your hands dirty and seasoned. It's like, I am an only child. And so I played every part in my plays. This was the opportunity and the place that I was able to experience a, an extension of nuclear family, because it was me and my mom and my stepdad. When we went there, you just never knew how many cousins were going to be there, who was going to show up, and what was cooking, and whether they had croquet. Yeah, I'm dating myself, but that's okay because it's no secret. Whether they had a croquet game set up, or whether you could just run in fields of corn and grape orchards. I remember that Leisure World was the first structure to go up in that area. Prior to that, it was literally just fields and forest and corn and tomatoes and so when you went there, I was a city girl. My mom was a city girl. And that was the country. We would say we're going to the country. And literally you sat on a stoop, you sat on wooden stairs because they were one shack, and pretty much that's what they were at that time. And you got to tell silly jokes and play with your cousins that you didn't see any other occasion because they very rarely came to the city. And I actually, my grandmother, my great grandmother's house, there was no bathroom, and so I had to like toughen up again, city girl. I didn't know anything about outhouses, and go to the outhouse if you wanted to go to the bathroom. And my aunt Bert and Charlie, they used to call it the black and white house, and literally that's because it was painted black and white. It was on a corner, but in the basement of the house there was a little store.
Mm.
And as a kid, to be able to go down these stairs into this, I don't know, plethora of like wooden barrels with penny candy in it and bubble gum in it. And every now and then a neighbor would come in and literally with a tin cup get a cup or two of rice or flour, and it would go into a brown paper bag. And, these weren't experiences that I was exposed to where I lived. In the, show enough, we moved to the city. And so it was an opportunity to touch a part of my history that um, is precious.
Mm,
Yeah.
I can see you going down the steps.
Yeah, man. They were on the outside of the house because,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't want people, traipsing through their house. It wasn't that many stairs, but it was fascinating. And they
Mm-hmm.
never locked the door.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? They
Wow. That was.
never locked the door. People would literally, sometimes I would actually spend the night there. And the first thing I wanted to do when I got woke up in the morning was, go down there and get a piece of candy or whatever. And sometimes the people who would come at
Mhm,
whatever time they came, they would leave the coins because,
mhm,
stuff was, I don't know, 5 cents, 2 cents, whatever. They would leave the coins on the counter.
mhm,
And with a little check mark off of they had like a little, literally, it was a brown sheet of paper that
mhm,
had everything that they had there.
mhm.
And there'd be a little check and the money for it.
Wow.
That's how they live.
That's a lot of things. When I hear that, I hear community, I hear trust, I hear faith, I hear
Yeah.
um, making sure that your community is taken care of. I mean, forget about 7-Eleven. I mean, it's the black and white house. I
Yeah,
mean, because,
seven what? Yeah. No,
yeah, it's
man.
always open and it shows a level of cooperative economics. I think about the
Oh
principles
wow.
of Kwanzaa,
Mhm.
all of them, all of them. I'm calling in Umoja, I'm calling in Kujichagulia,
Yeah.
Ujima, Ujama.
It
I
it
mean,
actually did exist. We did live in a community, because certainly not in a world, but
mhm,
in a community that was an authentic community.
mhm,
People took care of one another. People looked out for
mhm,
one another. People shared what they had and what they didn't have. It seems such a long time ago now, in the literal sense and
mhm,
in the real sense.
mhm,
We've been relieved of those ways of being,
mhm.
so yeah, it was a big deal when we got ready to when mom would say, okay, we're going to the country today, you know.
Well, I will say this to our listeners and to you that ever since meeting you in 1997, um, you embody what you just shared. And it is a walking, talking expression of your own version of it and your own human beingness of it. And listeners, you're going to hear more about what I'm talking about in upcoming episodes. So sit tight. Spoiler alert. There's more to talk about. There's always more to talk about, but I'm putting a pin in that um, because I think, for the first time, I've heard you share deeply about what I know intuitively is one part of the essence of who you are to me and who you have been to my family. Um, so speaking of family,
uh, yeah,
let's talk about this vintage photograph. You've shared this with me. This is a photograph of your amazing, stylish grandmother, Gladys Sarah Duvall, the mother of your grandmother. This is the mother of your mother, Sarah Clarissa Chris Duvall Dry.
yep,
That is similar to a photograph that you had taken in the early 1980s. It looks like the photograph of your grandmother, Gladys, who died 6 months before you were born.
yeah.
And that photograph of your grandmother, Gladys, was taken around the 1920s or the early 1930s.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the connection that you made to your grandmother Gladys when you realized you had a similar photo of yourself.
Well, Certainly, I have, I won't say always, but certainly most often wished and wanted to have known her in the literal sense. Certainly, my mom was in a lot of ways, as, especially after looking at that photograph, but also from conversations with relatives, an extension of her. But I had no clue. I mean, I did not know when I took this photograph, I was unaware of the photograph of my grandmother. And, before this is over, I really hope to be able to lay my hands on the photograph that I took of myself so that I can share it, share that and the photograph of my grandmother with the world. Literally, at that time, my hair was short like it is now, but it was straight, and so it was laying flat on my head. And for whatever reason, I felt compelled to be in what essentially it channels the 1920s because it looked like kind of a flapper dress. And there's a single strand of pearls in a knot. The photograph of my grandmother, she didn't have to create straight hair. Her hair was more straight than not. And she's sitting. The only distinction is that her dress is gray and mine was black. There is a single strand of knotted pearls. So, that says to me that without intention, the threads in the tapestry weave themselves. Without intention, you know, um, it's my understanding that my grandmother was quiet, but not. And when I think about myself, it's generally the reverse, not quiet, but quiet. And so it brought me a kind of peace to be a witness to that thread because I wasn't blessed with having known her um, and having her be a living, breathing part of my history.
Mm, that was beautiful. I often believe that our ancestors, especially our woman line ancestors, and that for everybody is the women that make up her story. I often believe that they plant seeds in our lives. For me, and I think like you, they have planted seeds in fashion. They have planted seeds in how we show up, what we adorn ourselves with, from lip colors to clothing to jewelry to all kinds of accessories to how we decorate our homes. I mean, I feel like they speak to us in those ways if you're tuned in and you're tapped in. So I want to ask you, tell us about your grandmother Gladys, what you do know.
Mm, gosh, you're going to shame me, or I'm going to shame myself. What I do know is that she birthed my mom, who, by the way, like her daughter, is an only child. I do know that she spent a significant amount of her time in Gaithersburg, as well as Pittsburgh. That's a part of my lineage as well. And I do know that she, for the most part, raised my mother as a single woman. And in that time, that's extraordinary. Um, I don't know why her connection to my grandfather didn't um, didn't last. I only know that it didn't. Um, and anything else I would be making up just because I wanted to sound like this or that. That's the simple truth. Those are the things that I know. Yeah,
I'm glad you know that.
me too.
I'm glad that you know that.
Me too.
Now, your great grandmother, Miss Ella Duvall,
Mm, mm.
this is the mother, right, of Gladys Sarah Duvall, your grandmother.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about Miss Ella.
Ella was she was when I came upon her, she was already in her mid 80s. In her mid 80s, she was very unassuming. She was a woman of few words. Unless you pissed her off or did something that was not appropriate, then she could let you know that. She was an extraordinary maker of something out of nothing. She could put a simple pail of greens on, and by the time she finished with it, you felt like you were dining on something that wasn't just a simple collard green. She raised several of her grandchildren. She lived in that's really initially, other than Bert and Charlie, we would go a little bit earlier on. We would go to her house, and it was literally, and I want to be correct, 3 rooms. 3 rooms. There was a living room uh, with makeshift furniture in it, and there was a little kitchen, as it were, with a real ice. When I say ice box, I don't mean refrigerator. I mean ice box. That's what they were then. And there was, in quotes, a bedroom that no matter how many people ended up being there for the night, that's where we slept. 2 and 3 kids in a bed at the time. She always impressed me as someone who was able to practice don't sweat the small stuff. You know, um, Rarely raised her voice, just went about the business of making sure that things were taken care of. You know, yeah, she was sweet.
Hmm.
She was sweet.
When we're talking about these beautiful women, can you describe what they look like?
Well, that's interesting. You should say that. I was sitting here trying to decide whether I was going to go there. So, my grandmother, it appears, not just appears, but it's been said to me, was not simply Black, but also Native American. And so she had a very tawny, this is from pictures, very tawny skin texture and very dark, straight black hair. My great grandmother, on the other hand, uh, it appeared came from the lineage of us who spent a significant amount of time in the house. She was extremely fair with also straight hair, much longer, slight wave pattern to it, slight features, no thickness of lip, no thickness of nose, But also clearly by her own choice or that of others, identified as a woman of color. Though was evident to me that she did not have to. You feel me? Yeah. Yeah. So
I feel you.
yeah. Yeah, like that.
And your
Mhm.
mom.
You know, I almost want to mom was sort of in between in between the two of them. You know, caramel in color, um, short hair. She never had long hair. Um, pretty of color black kind of features. I mean, not extraordinarily so,
Mhm.
but certainly, black features. Um, I my lineage is interesting in that the women were either extremely tall,
Mhm.
like 5'9", 5'10", or extremely short, like moi. You know, 5'2", 5'3". My mom again was kind of in the middle. She was 5'7",
Mhm.
um, and people tell me often say to me, "Did you have a daddy?" Because you and your mother spit you out.
Mm.
Um, and with humility, I say that people found her to be uh, visually beautiful.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it shows, for me, it just shows the depth of the rainbow and how it
sure.
manifests in our families. And we all know that. But I think for those that are listening that may not come from our African American, Indigenous backgrounds, it's helpful, I think, to share these
It's
things.
imperative.
Yeah,
You know
it's
what I mean? It's not just helpful, it's imperative because that is the tapestry. You know what I
there
mean?
you go.
That is the tapestry.
That right there.
And that there's no, I don't feel a need in any way to be in any denial about that at all. It's part of what has created this eclectic makeup that I call me.
Mm,
So
mm,
yeah.
yeah. Wow. You spoke about some of your memories of visiting this wonderful place called Stewarttown. Are
Mm.
there any other memories that come to mind about your visits that you want to share with the listeners?
Well, I think, I mean, there are snippets here and there, but again, I think I shared with you. You're asking us just to reach, you
Well,
know,
yeah.
pretty far.
Well,
But
that's what we're doing.
as I, all right, all right, all right. As I was a bit older, but this is a really fond memory because it was such an oxymoron. It
Mhm.
was at Aunt Bert and Uncle Charlie's black and white, which by the way wasn't brick, it was wood. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? And even though it was on a corner, so it took up a little more property, and it was a little bit larger,
Mhm.
it was still, a black and white meager house,
Mhm.
but they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary there. And, the china was gold rimmed and the glasses were crystal. And they dedicated one of the rooms to the just plethora of presents. And there were so many people that it was tented outside. And there were lanterns and, and this is in the still show enough, like the houses, all that stuff hadn't quite started going up. So you're still looking across at cornfields, and space and blue sky. And it was regal. It was regal, but it was also, there was no denial about where it was.
Mm.
It was still Stewart Town,
Mm.
and the folks that came, they folks came from the city. So the city folks had a different liking to the country folks,
Mm.
and it was a mix of all of the things that we are, and all of the things that they were. They lived long enough to, they went on cruises with my mom and dad, and they traveled, but they never forgot to return home, to their roots. I adored, particularly my Aunt Bert. My Uncle Charlie was the kind of man who would, when you went there, it was about the food. A lot of times, it's about the food. Just food, 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 food. Cornbread, homemade. If they could have made peas from scratch, she would have. You know what I'm saying? So I tended to pile my plate up, and my uncle would invariably. It was almost like he was waiting for me to do it, because as soon as I did and I sat down, he would edge up next to me and lean over. He wouldn't sit, he would lean over and he would say, "Take all you want, but eat all you take."
Mm.
And you're talking about, just choking up like,
Mm.
oh, and trust me, he meant it.
Mhm.
There were occasions where, my eyes were bigger than my stomach. And he would be like, "Yeah, I thought so." And he would pull up that chair next to you. Say, "Take your time, but eat it all." That, it wasn't about, waste not, want not.
Mhm.
They, they didn't believe in wasting,
Mhm.
so
Wow,
yeah.
that's beautiful. I love the stories, and I love that we're using this beautiful technology in a mindful way to honor your ancestors, to honor you and the way in which they impacted you and how they continue to impact you. And I know, and I want to say to our listeners, I know that people will be touched by this story in some way. People will be touched by this story. And my prayer is that we all tell our stories to each other, and that we begin to use the technology, whatever way you want to use it, in a mindful way to tell the stories. Because, as I'm paraphrasing, as Toni Morrison has said, our great ancestor, as our great ancestor Bell Hooks has urged us, there's never enough stories. There's
Hmm.
never enough. And I'm paraphrasing, y'all. There's never enough stories told from the mouths of women, of African and indigenous uh, folk. There's never enough, which is one reason why I urged you many times over the years
Wait, okay,
to
wait.
to
Yes.
to tell the stories. And so I want to turn now to the Duvall family members, and that includes the extended, the chosen family.
Hmm.
That played a role in building and sustaining Stewarttown. We talked about Aunt Bert and Uncle Charlie in the black and white store in the house.
Hmm.
Who else would you like to bring into the room to let people know?
Well, there was a sort of an extension. There were Duvalls, but there were Frasers and Prathers, and they stuck and stayed. That when they moved there, even if they built a larger property, a larger house on their property, or they expanded the existing housing that they had, they stayed and they raised their families, and their families raised their families there, and so it went on in perpetuity. I mean, when I first started going there, my goodness, Ananda, let's see. I was maybe 7 or 8, something like that. But it went on and on and on until I was certainly in my 20s. I want to maybe I was even in my 30s, still visiting there,
Mhm.
still going there for the cookouts and the picnics. And my mom used to give my stepfather, my father, and I'll go back and forth. It depends on what I'm feeling, whether I call him my father or my stepfather. But his birthday was August the 31st, and that's very close to Labor Day, and so my mom chose that as the occasion to celebrate him and to bring all these people together. And when I tell you, it was huge. There were still outdoor wooden picnic tables strewn over on Bert and Uncle Charlie's property. And there was a brick um, barbecue pit where literally she would barbecue slabs and slabs of ribs, yeah, pork, some beef, but yeah, barbecued chicken, vats, fires built outside to make cooked potatoes, to make potato salad and greens and string. Man, it was a big deal. People came from everywhere, and those are memories that included different elements of the literal family, the Duvalls, the Frasers, the Prathers. They weren't left out. It wasn't about city people coming to hang out in the country. It was about bringing all of that together. And so, dressed to the nines, the city folks were very, very vested in making sure that they had on the proper attire and all of that. But those were occasions that you couldn't pay for. People waited a year until it came around again to show up. Plus, the food, Lord have mercy, just yeah. So,
Mm, yeah. Let's take a big breath in and out. I can see people coming for that annual cookout,
mm-hmm,
annual birthday bash.
mm-hmm.
It makes me think of the white parties that people have.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's one that's an annual one in DC. It's on Blanc. Is it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes me think of that. Uh,
Current version of
yeah,
but
a very unique homecoming in a sense.
yeah.
People coming home. So when we think about the woman that you are now
Mm.
and looking at, we talked a bit about your grandmother, your great grandmother, your mom, and we're going to do a whole episode. It may even be a part two uh, about Marcia's beautiful mother, Chris. I want to focus on now the people in the family and the extended family that really feel, because I think everyone touched your life, but the key folks that you're feeling and thinking of today that helped raise and shape you into the woman you are now. And some of those folks could be in your native Washington, D.C. It could be folks that are, you know, directly related to Stewarttown because you were going back and forth. And I'm sure the folks in DC made a trip to Stewarttown at some point.
Oh
Been
yeah.
there.
Yeah, those threads are thick.
Mhm.
You know, key. I'm never going to be able to start off identifying spirits and souls that touched me without, starting with my mother, because I think she is planted and has created tributaries in me that, unlike any other single person. But then, Aunt Bert, as well, because I I don't know whether it's true of only children or whether it's just true of this only child, but we I could be, rather strange, a rather odd bird relative to the rest of the world. And my Aunt Bert, simply always embraced me. She embraced the me in me. She created the space for me to be, um, whoever it was I needed to be, in that moment. And then my mom's cronies, the Aunt B and Aunt Mildred and, Aunt Peggy and there they had husbands, and they kind of get in there a little bit, but these women, they were really mindful about wanting to help me get comfortable in my own skin. I was, now say my stepfather, and not my father, because one of the things that he did often was to call me Miss Piggy, because I was fat. I was getting ready to try to find another word, but for my age, and my aunts would chastise him and suggest that that was not a way to create, a soul that was comfortable. You know, they were there when my mom wasn't able to be. Since I didn't actually have any aunts, they stepped in. They stepped in. They stepped up. So yeah, and there were a couple. Yeah, Aunt Margie. I don't speak of her too often because she was. Yeah, she probably would have. She's probably, in a couple of people's books of like, yeah, that. Oh my gosh, because she was, always comfortable in her own skin and didn't give a you know what about what you thought about it. So of course, I would like to say that, yeah, some of that streak in me, because it certainly exists, um, I give her credit for. You know, she was comfortable in her own skin, and that was a very necessary example. Even though certainly there are myriads of periods in my life where I forgot. So yeah, yeah.
Anybody else that you want to share that may have inspired you? Because I think they all inspired you.
My Uncle Ike, yeah, let my Uncle Ike, he was a sweet man, just a sweet spirit. And he could cook, and he was patient, and he would entrust me with being of assistance. Especially he was the one that did Thanksgiving. And he would always make sure that I had, not just a job, but an important one, one that mattered. Um, yeah, yeah,
Wow. Shout out to Uncle Ike's in the
yeah.
world. Yeah. How do you currently relate to your ancestors as an adult, 70-year-old?
Watch yourself. Watch yourself.
69, y'all.
I got
She's
28. I got 28 days left.
thank you,
Hold
thank you,
up.
thank you.
Okay.
69
Yeah, I
and
appreciate
some
you. Okay.
days.
Yeah,
Yeah, as
that's
a
right.
69
No.
year old.
Yeah, we begin to rush things a little less as
Well, yeah, and I also want to give context to the listeners because you were talking about being 7 and 8, 6 and 7 and 8.
yeah, there you go.
And so Marcia is it all right to share? Because we're going to share in another episode that you were born in
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. in 1954. So the
Yeah.
time,
Oh, 54. Yeah, I don't
yeah,
have
so the time period
that.
that we were talking about previously when she was mentioning going to Stewarttown
Yeah,
was
man.
was in the was in the late 50s,
Yeah, early 60s,
60s. Yeah.
pre-riot.
Yeah.
You know what
This
I'm
is
saying? Pre-riot.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is living
Yeah.
history that
When,
we're hearing.
let's be real, when certainly the possibility that, you were going to be called directly or hear it indirectly, the N word was absolutely real.
Mm.
Absolutely real. Yeah. Uh, so,
And
um,
one thing I want to point out before we dive deeper into how you relate to your ancestors, it just came to me when I'm thinking about the stories that you talked about, people celebrating birthdays, coming together, Thanksgiving, just everyday life. Um, to me, that is Black joy that folks talk about now. We did a lot of things back in the day that we didn't give voice to. We didn't have a label to. We weren't writing books about it, making videos. We didn't have all the technology and the things now that we do. But what we're talking about, everybody, in some parts of these beautiful threads in this tapestry of a life lived by Marcia Duvall is Black joy at its essence. Black joy is so important for us to point it out because so many of us, me included, are so freaking busy sometimes that we don't recognize the Black joy that we are embodying, expressing, experiencing, calling in to existence, and then wondering why we feel a certain way. Well, are we looking? We're looking at our lineage. Do you have a lineage of Black joy? If you don't, do you want to get a lineage of Black joy? You know,
well,
maybe these stories that we're sharing in this beautiful podcast series is going to encourage, inspire, inform someone to get some Black joy in the lineage if you don't have it, or to pull it out and definitely talk about it and celebrate it, you know?
Well, I mean, it's actually right here and right now doing that with and for me. You know, I don't know that prior to your expressing it in that way, that I viewed it as Black joy. I think I viewed it as, you know, these are stories that I'm telling, and it certainly creates a kind of warmth inside as I revisit them.
Mhm.
But and also I was not claiming them as such. And so, you know, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you had that little segue there because I I have been sitting here wanting to be thoughtful and mindful about making connections between them and me and their gift and me. And the word that keeps coming up for me is tenacity. Um, you know, when I look back on the meagerness of their lives, the meagerness. And there were many occasions then, and certainly as an arrogant teenager, where I turned my nose up at it. You know what I mean? Where I became then the, oh, really? Do we really have to go to the country? You know? Because the TV was black and white and small, if there was one. And the blah blah. But they gave me tenacity. Um, and they gave me the ability. I said this about my great grandmother, and I didn't even know I was doing it, to make something out of what people perceived as nothing. You know, it's nothing today for me to walk down the street and see what someone may think is some discarded thing, and or a flower that I take a picture of and then do something with the just the myriad of ways that they were able to enrich their lives from what we perceive as nothing. So I think if there's a single thing, not that there has to be a single thing, but that's the thing, and that has tentacles. It goes all over the place.
Mhm.
So for that, I am, wow, uh, grateful in a way that I hadn't paid homage to.
Mhm.
So there
Yeah.
you have it.
Yeah, I think the tenacity that you speak of and all of the other blessings, named and unnamed, that's the generational wealth. You know, that's the generational wealth when we step outside of this white patriarchal, I'm going to go there, supremacist society, and we begin to define ourselves by ourselves, paraphrasing our great ancestor Audre Lorde. That's what we begin to hold on to, that generational wealth that you can't put a dollar, you can't put anything on it. Sometimes you can't even name it. It's just that, it's that feeling. It's just that feeling. It's that legacy. It's that lineage. You can't get that at the store. You can't order that from the empire that I don't want to give name to. We all know what I'm talking about. It starts with an A and ends with an N. You can't get that. You cannot get that from the W that, and it ends with a T. You can't get that. You cannot get that from any store. And it's no diss to the stores. It's just that that's how I'm feeling in this moment. So maybe it is a
You're
diss.
allowed.
Yeah, it is a diss. I'm going to just call it what it is and stop pretending. But that's the generational wealth that is what makes up this incredibly authentic, rich tapestry of threads that gets to walk the earth is Marcia Duvall.
Hmm.
And I want to ask you a few more questions about relating to your
What?
ancestors. Yeah, just a few more, just to, because I'm
Mm,
yes,
mm,
yay,
mm. Oh, yay.
yay. How do you tap into the love of your ancestors or call on them for wisdom or guidance, if at all?
I don't know. I don't know that I do. But again, my goodness, I'm not sure that this is not going to take a twist and a turn that I didn't see coming. Um, so my mother's intention when she named me Marcia. The spelling Marcia. Her intention was the French spelling of the pronunciation of Marcia. So that was her intention. When I arrived, I don't know, approximately 2021, I decided that Marcia was more worldly, more appealing, more exotic, more interesting. So I changed the pronunciation. My mother made it her personal business, um, particularly if there was a crowd around, to raise her voice when calling me Marcia. And there are people in my life who love to remind me, I knew you when your name was Marcia. Okay. So there are these whimsical occasions when, I don't know, I'm being introduced and somebody will say, "Oh, is your name Marcia or Marcia? What's your," or you know, just these places where it'll come up, right? And so I always know, okay, let me stop. What is it that you need to say, mom, or you're trying to get me to hear, blah. And so, it's really with her that thread exists. I maybe with the woman I called my Nana, every now and then she'll show herself. But I can't say that there's this mindful, loving connection that permeates. No, not that I'm aware of. By the time this is all said and done, maybe I will be though.
We'll see. We'll have to see how the twists and turns take us. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Well, I think this is a great place to say, everybody, you got to tune in for the next episode where we go deeper into this beautiful woman, Chris, who gave birth to this beautiful woman, Marcia, and continued the Duvall woman line. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, in between time, what an amazing conversation we've had today, Marcia. Oh
Wow.
my gosh.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Um, yeah, the light is bright. So
Yes, it is.
thank
It
you.
is. You're welcome. You're welcome. It is an honor and a pleasure to hold space for your ancestors, my ancestors, and everybody that is listening and will listen to
Mm.
this story. So, do you have any closing words that you want to say to the folks in the listening audience?
Just be fearless. Choose love.
I love that. I love that. And we're going to hear that again, everybody. Just another spoiler alert. That's coming too. The essence of a beautiful place called Trade Secrets on U Street that became my womb. of healing and creativity. You know, I had to give a little shout out to Trade Secrets on U Street.
Right.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that during the series. So stay tuned if you don't know that part of the story. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to tune in and listen to this wonderful episode. I'm calling it wonderful because it is. Come on back. And if you like, continue listening because there's some wonderful information. I like to call them commercials, but we're going to call them Marcia commercials that are coming up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're going to make another name.
All right.
Marcia commercials that are coming up. So you'll hear more in those Marcia commercials. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.